It would be pretty funny that for my own book club that my book had no one show up. Been very nervous. Oh, good. People are here. Hooray! Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Ben's Book Club. We're doing things a little differently this time around. As you can see, we have the amazing, the wonderful Chris Hammer, who has just, I think, been in rural Queensland over the weekend. So he's flown back home in order to be here with us today. As always with Ben's Book Club, we do ask that everyone in the chat just, say where you're from, how you're going, what you're drinking of choice, are you eating dinner? How is everybody? I don't know, Chris, if you can see in the chat, we have Carol Hobson.
Yep, I can see the chat there. Hi, Carol.
That's my mum.
Hi, Ben's mum.
Yeah, bet my dad's there too.
Yeah.
My mum and dad
Shelley Burr. Hello, Shelley.
My mum and dad used to come to all of my punk music gigs, and they used to stand up the back of every gig and used to go like this. It's good, buddy, because we were so loud. But that's the sort of parents that I have.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so they're glad you've taken up writing books.
Probably. I think so. Yeah. Oh, we've got lots of, look at all the people. Look at where everyone's from. How awesome is this? New England, Cairns, Albury Wodonga. I was just talking to someone from Albury Wodonga the other day. On a radio thing, I think. That was really cool. Phillip Island. Oh, so cool. I love Phillip Island. Awesome. South Morang. Hello, everybody. You're very welcome. So I'll introduce Chris. Chris is here. You've all heard of Chris Hammer. Let's be real. He's probably one of the most popular Australian authors, I think. Top 10? Top 10, Chris? What do you say?
Who knows? Anyway, I'm very happy actually with the people who've been reading my books. Absolutely.
Well, there's such good books. But he is the author of the Martin Scarsdale series of novels, and you've also been writing The Tilt, which is centered on a different protagonist. And you've had a 30-year career as a journalist. You're I think, one of my best friends in the writing community in Australia. So yeah, really, it's an honor to have you here today to talk to me about my book, which I have here, The Death of John Lacey. Yeah. And I think your name's on the front.
Oh, is it?
It is, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You called me a great writer.
It's a great writer. This is a great book. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely true.
Robin over here saying you're number one Australian author. There you go, Robin. Got a big fan over there, yeah.
Oh, thanks, Robin. That's good. Okay, that's good. Thank you, everyone. Should we kick off, Ben?
Yeah, let's go. Let's get into things. And hey, as always with the chat, it's the opportunity to ask me questions. Just type it into chat, and we're very happy. Chris and I are very chilled out, and we love to have a conversation and answer your questions as well. So if you have any questions for me, just pop it in at any time, and we'll get to it as we go.
Okay, so this isn't the first time that Ben and I have talked to each other about books. He often interviews me when I have a book coming out. I interview him. In fact, when John Lacey first came out, The Death of John Lacey first came out a little while ago, Ben, on a very hurried road trip promoting the book, called in at Canberra.
Yeah,
did an event there at the library in Kingston. Ben, tell us about that road trip, because it seemed to me completely insane.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, it did. It felt. Can I say I went through it? I went through it a little bit on that road trip. Like, it got to a point where I was driving so often, and I was just so exhausted. I was missing my family, and I really did go. Those times when you question your existence a little bit, because that's where I got to.
Well, to just tell people what your itinerary was, what the sort of distances you were driving each day.
Yeah, so I was in the Richmond Tweed area for 3 days, and I did some library events there. So that's sort of upper New South Wales. But then I drove down to Canberra, and I stopped outside. It's Goulburn, right, where the big ram is, Rambo.
So
Yeah,
it's about a 9 hour drive, right?
yeah. And then I did an event in Canberra, and then after that event, we had dinner with a few writer friends, and then I drove for another hour down to forgotten the
Cooma.
name. Thank you. I knew it started with a C. I was thinking Coffs Harbour, but see, this is where my mind was getting so confused. And I stayed there, but then I drove another 8 hours to Yarram in Victoria the next day, and I did an event there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I saw my mum and dad. Hi, mum and dad. And then I drove from there through to Melbourne, and I did ABC RN, which was just yesterday. I think it came out, the interview I did there. And then I drove to Ballarat, and then I drove up through. Starts with what's the place with the zoo? Halfway in New South.
Dubbo.
Ah,
Dubbo.
thank you. Yeah, I stopped at Dubbo. So that was 10 hours from Ballarat, and then I drove to Brisbane another 10 hours and did an event that night, and then I went home. But it's awesome too because it's hard when you're doing that sort of thing. It's you sort of go a bit
Yeah.
cuckoo, and I was listening to a lot of podcasts and a lot of music, and it was very nice too. And that's the thing is it's very rewarding whenever you get to the events and you get to meet readers and you get to actually have conversations like and meet and spend time with people in my industry, people who are my peers and my friends, and see my family and go to Ballarat. Like I got to go. They shouted me a mine tour, and I got to go into this underground mine, and I got to see some real life, settings from the book. It was really cool. But yeah, very exhausting.
So mining in those goldfields in Ballarat uh, play an important part in the Death of John Lacey. It's essentially the setting. Tell us about that.
Hmm.
And it's interesting that you got to research it after the book was published.
Yeah. Well, I'd written the first part of the book in 2019, and that's the part that's called The Conquest of John Lacey. And I actually stopped writing the book because of, well, two separate sort of reasons. The first being I just didn't feel very equipped to be writing in a thoughtful way about representations of the Wadawurrung people. I didn't feel like I'd equipped myself in that capacity well enough, and I doubted my ability at all to even eventually equip myself. But then I also stopped because I just didn't know enough. And I thought, you know what, this time I'm going to go on a research trip. And I applied for a travel grant. I applied for the Nilma Sydney travel grant, and I sent through my application in January. It's the only time in my whole career where I've actually applied for a grant. And I was really excited. I was going to spend a whole week down there. I'd made contact with Marlene Gilson, who's a Wadawurrung elder who was helping me out. So I was going to meet her. And I hit submit in January 2020. And then obviously February 2020 happened and COVID happened and the grant got cancelled, and travel into Victoria for that whole time was nigh on impossible. And then when it did become possible, it's I had two different things booked, but both times they were shortcutted because either I got COVID or someone from my family did, and it was just very difficult. And so, unfortunately, the very first time I actually got to go and spend time in Sovereign Hill and at Ballarat and got to meet Marlene in person, it wasn't until December last year I made a really quick flight down, and I actually got to spend time with her and in the setting then. And if I'm being real, I mean, if I had my way, I would. You can't do anything about COVID, and it's obviously affected a lot of people a lot worse than it's affected little old me. But that was an effect, and it's. I don't know. I don't know whether the book would read any differently. I've been there now, and looking back, I don't know whether I would have changed anything. But I can't say that with any certainty. You don't know that sort of thing until you're in it, right? So if I had one thing back, I would love to be able to actually go down and spend time there before the book was locked.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem to me very much a work of the imagination.
Mm.
That's the kind of way it's written too. The tone of it is not, it's not, seems to me, it's not trying to represent these things as completely factual. There's a little bit of a, like not a
Yeah.
fairy story, but a very, very atmospheric and very moody rather than just matter of fact, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I actually think that's okay. Like I kind of like that it is my imagination that gets to invent it after reading, a lot of research and reading a lot of books on the subject. Um, yeah, I actually quite like it because I think it gets to be exactly what I think it is, and I'm not as maybe beholden to reality. I actually did the same thing with To Become a Whale with my first book. I actually never went to Tangalooma whaling station, and that was for a different reason. That was because I had written 4 books at that time and had none published, and thought I was never going to have anything published, and I didn't want to spend $150 on myself to go over there because I thought it wouldn't be worthwhile. And and then the book got picked up, and I was like, oh, okay. Um,
We'll get on to the death of John Lacey in a moment, but
yeah,
there's a lot of people who are your regulars here who sort of tune in and listen to you a lot. So I think they'd probably be interested just when you said that you'd already written 3 or 4 books, none of
yeah.
them being published. Tell us about that. Tell us about your journey as a writer, as an
Mhm.
aspiring writer, and how did you get there in the end?
Yeah, good question. Really big question too. Yeah, it was a long time. I really came to writing, I think, through music. So I was a musician first. I was in a band in Victoria, and our band was called Sounds Like Chicken. If anyone wants to go and listen to us on Spotify, where if you listen to ska hardcore punk and like people shouting with trumpets, that was our bag. It was
And
very
what did you play?
played the bass guitar.
Okay.
Yeah. So a lot of walking bass, a lot of reggae and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, we were also in the age once as the top 50 worst band names in Australian history. So felt like we made it.
What number were you on the list?
Well, they had just had it in alphabetical, so we could have, in theory, been number one. I don't know. We were right next to Something for Kate, so I
Okay.
actually like Something for Kate, though. I think
Yeah.
it's a good name. Um, but then tragically met a beautiful girl up here in Queensland who's currently in the room next door watching Indiana Jones with our kids. So it worked out well, the move
You
up to
sure you
Queensland.
want to describe that as tragic?
Well, only reason it's tragic, I mean, my mum's in the chat. The only reason the tragedy was that I left behind. I left behind my family. I left behind my band, who were my sort of creative family, who made me feel really appreciated, I guess, for being a bit of a weirdo. I don't know how you've always felt, Chris. I mean, you seem like a really cool person, but I've always felt extremely strange for being a bit creative. Look, Mum's crying in the chat. Look, she's got the crying emoji. Yeah, she's still not over it. You're coming up in like a week, Mum. You're going to be here. It's okay.
She she wants the band to reform.
We did. We had a reunion gig. Well, actually, nearly 10 years ago. Oh my gosh.
So,
Anyway,
so,
so
so the band folds. You're in Brisbane. You've
yes,
fallen in love, but
yes.
you lack a creative outlet.
100%. And I did have music up here and I had a few little things, but it wasn't the same. And it was actually Lena who suggested, well, you love to read. Why don't you go and have a go at writing? I also feel like it's a little sneaky on her part because writing is kind of a cheap hobby. Well, in theory, I mean, unless you're doing research trips, in theory, it's kind of cheap. You just literally need a pen and a pad, and you can do the hobby, right?
Yeah, but
Um,
it doesn't take much money, but it takes a hell of a lot of time.
and that was the next thing. So at uni, I started to write creatively, and almost instantly, and I think this is fairly rare, I had a short story published. It was a horror. It was about a world in which death was obsolete. No one died anymore. So then they made a extreme sport out of the most creative ways to die.
Okay.
It was pretty good. And so anyway, that got picked up, and I thought, oh, writing's easy. You know, I've got instant success, and I can see you're laughing.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I spent the next 9 years writing, and I felt like in the wilderness. And it feels like when you see all these authors and you hear all these people talk about it, it feels like you're banging on the door and you're sort of going, I've got something cool here, I think, let me in, guys. And everyone's really kind, everyone's supportive, but it feels like you're on the outside looking in all the time. And I was just writing, and then writing whole novels, and I wrote a novel, and you know how long a novel takes, Chris, like, and the amount of work and time. And I'm doing uni, and I had 3 jobs at the same time. It was extremely, and I wrote every day, and I persevered. And a lot of people ask me sometimes, like, how did you do that? One, I don't know how I kept on going, even though I had rejection after rejection, and just, that stack keeps growing. But there's a story that I tell that kind of illustrates my way of thinking about things. It was after going to one of these. I had a tutor in the day, a tutorial in the day. Then I had an 8-hour shift at Blockbuster, which again dates me a little bit. And then at 9 o'clock at night, I was on my way home on the bus, and I went past a KFC, and I thought, blow it. I'm going to reward myself. I'm going to go get me some popcorn chicken, the greatest food invention in history. And I went to the KFC, and in front of me were these 2 large families, and there was a trainee on, serving them. So my question, Chris, to you, how long would you wait in that line before you left?
Oh, it depends on how desperate and hungry I was, I guess, but
Okay,
probably
so your
not
goal
very
is just
long.
you want popcorn chicken, and you are extremely hungry, and you've had a long day.
Yeah, not long.
Yeah, most people say that. Most people go like 5 minutes. I give it
Yeah.
5 minutes, but after that, I'm at bailing. So after the first hour, it had taken a long, it was a long wait, but I'd moved up one notch in the line. And I'm not kidding when I say this, because I remember I looked at my watch and I clocked it, and it was 1.5 hours before I got my popcorn chicken. But by the time I was in that line for even 20 minutes, in my mind, I go, I'm not leaving until I get popcorn chicken.
Because you'd already invested your 20 minutes.
100%. It was just because of the investment. I'm like, I'm not leaving. I'm not going. And it was the same with writing, I think. Once I was in it, I was just like, I'm not leaving until I do the thing I set out to do, which was to have a novel published. But I can tell you, Chris, like, it got very close. In fact, I gave up. To become a whale, I gave up. I was longlisted for the Vogel Award, and then with that feedback, I sent it out again. But the rejection of not winning that award, I'd really built it up in my mind, and I just felt defeated. And I was like, I'm not. I'm done. I'm done. I've spent 9 years on this. I think I've given it a good shot. I think you can hold your head up with honor. I've done my best, but it's just not something that's going to happen for me.
So how did it happen? You'd
Well,
written
lo
a
and behold,
book that had been longlisted,
yeah.
and then what?
Well, I actually used so in the long listing, they sent a little form back, and it said, while this is an incredibly powerful story of masculinity, of father and sons growing together, it does not quite reach the dramatic heights it was aiming for. And so you can tell I've memorized that.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back through and I did a drama pass, and I tried to elevate the drama in all these different ways. I changed a relationship in the novel to make it a little bit more fraught, I guess. And then it was sort of like the last little ditch effort where I collapsed over the finish line, and then I sent it out to agents. And in the agent submission too, I actually put in the line what the Vogel feedback was. This is a powerful story of masculinity, because I didn't know what it was. And then Gabby,
I
my
do.
agent. Yeah, she emailed me on the way home from work, like three months later. I got an email, I was driving. I wasn't looking at my phone, everybody, while I was driving. I really do promise, Mum. I definitely wasn't, but I did glance at it and I saw it was from an agent, Gabby, and it said, I just read the top and it said something like, I love this. And I pulled over and read the email, and the email said, I love this. Do you have representation? And it was almost those two sentences. I was like, email back, no. Oh, can I give you a call in 30 minutes? So I raced home, again, obeying the speed limit, though. And um, I tried to sound really cool and down to earth and like not ecstatic out of my mind. Yeah, hey, yeah, what's going? Like, just try to be cool. I don't think I succeeded, but it was from there. Gabby was really. I always say to people, like, you just need one champion, and Gabby was that champion for me. She just really fell in love with the book, and yeah, the rest of that sort of happened from there. It was really thanks to her.
But would she have been your champion if she'd read your first attempt at a novel?
No, and I think it's so. Yeah, and I teach a few writing courses too, and people get really, really hung up on that first novel, and I certainly don't want to be the one to pop a bubble because who knows? And first novels do get picked up as well, and they can be incredible, but it's not my experience. My experience was I'm very grateful that those first novels weren't picked up. They were messy, they were confused, the writing wasn't very good. They were overlong in spots, some were too short. It was just, but it was practice. It's I really do think of it like a craft. And if you're building, I'm terrible with my hands, like I can't build anything. But if you're building a table, I'm sure you'd need to do a few practice tables and give them to family members and things like that before you actually try to sell them to people. And I needed
This
to
is
do that.
this is a really common story. Um,
Mm,
people, I've spoken to all sorts of authors. Everyone from Michael Robotham through to Michael Collin, whoever, and they've all got one or two or three books in the bottom drawer.
mm.
I've got one. My first book, Scrublands did really well, except it wasn't my first book. I tried to write a novel, when I was in my 20s. People
Yeah.
sometimes say, "Oh, is it still there? Can you dig it out?" Well, no, because it's just appallingly bad. And then I wrote two non-fiction books that were published, sold
Yeah.
hardly anything, but that really helped get my craft together.
Mm.
So by the time I wrote Scrublands, and that took me 4 or 5 years because I kept rewriting it because I kept realizing what was wrong with it.
Yeah.
Probably
Well, I think
another, it's probably another good attribute to have as a writer to be able to self-edit and go,
yeah,
actually, you know what, that just doesn't work. I'm going to take
100%.
another crack at that. So by the time Scrublands was eventually out, and then of course I got an agent and a publisher. We share the same publisher, Joan Palfreyman. Even after that, there was a massive rewrite to Scrublands, and now I think my um, my last book, The Tilt, is structurally more complex. I couldn't have written that book straight off. I couldn't have written that book at the time I wrote Scrublands. I can only
Yeah.
write it now because I've written, three or four other books, Scrublands and three other books in between. And I met a writer in Victoria not that long ago, a few months ago,
Mhm.
in October. And his theory was until you've had, I forget what it was, 4 or 5 books published, you really don't know what you're doing. Which I thought, I mean, there's some truth in it. Now,
You're
clearly,
there though. You're there. You know what you're doing now.
well, I tell you what, I think this last one I've just submitted about a week ago. I'm just starting that editing process. I think this one was the hardest of the lot. I
Wow.
just couldn't, I just
That's
found it very
that's
hard
so
to
incredible. And
gel.
I think I said to you because I did interview you for the Tilt. I think I said it is. I think it's your most accomplished as far as I think it's the most mature your craft has been. Like you can feel like there's an expertise in the writing. At least I can. I don't know whether readers read that, but just as a person who's as a writer myself as well, like when I'm reading, I'm like, I can sort of see it's just very mature, I thought, and very accomplished.
Okay, well, back to you. Your first book, To Become a Whale, comes out. You did Snake Island, which is very much a crime book,
I
which
don't.
I
Sorry,
love.
Chris. Can I interrupt? Do you notice how uncomfortable I am being on the other side of this? I just want to
But
talk to you.
but people have come along to listen about your book. So
I know.
what do you think you've been able to do with the death of John Lacey that you wouldn't have been able to do if you hadn't written those
Mm.
earlier books, both published and unpublished?
Oh, geez. It's the death of John Lacey is. If I never write another book, I'm happy, which sounds scary, but it's always been a goal of mine to write a book that I have very high standards for when I'm reading books. Especially like I can have a lot of books that I really enjoy and love, but then there's these books that to me they feel transcendent. Like they feel they're those special ones, and I don't think people get many of them in their lives, and it's different for each person. But there are these very special books that just sit atop this mountain to me. I'm like, oh my golly, like that is what humans can achieve. You know what I mean? Like that is the pinnacle. And I think, and again, not to speak into the future too much, but this is a book I'm always been hoping that I would write. I think um, it's since I started, it's the most. I started off with the purest intent, I think, and then I think it's come out the other end with as much integrity as I could muster with it, and the most honesty, and it's all the things that I admire in writing. Um, yeah, it's very rare to listen back to any song you've written and not think about and not cringe a little bit at certain sections, and it's just because we're so self-critical. And I think I'm very proud of everything I've done and all the books I've written, but this one doesn't. It almost feels like I couldn't have written it, like it's too good. And it sounds, maybe, I don't know. No, you know what? Yeah, I really am proud of it. And I feel like it's actually something that's extremely good. And I've never felt that way about something with my name on it before, except for my kids.
Yeah. Um, so now I'm assuming because this is a book club, most of the people will have already read it. Is that right?
Yeah, sometimes we sort of announce that we'll talk about the ending and spoilers. Most people tend to have read it, but then some people just put the mute button on if we talk about the ending. But yeah, we can talk about whatever you want.
Okay. Look, I might get you to read the first chapter, because even though a lot of people will have read the book, I think
Yeah.
it takes us. It's very short. It's about half a page. It takes us right into I guess, the mood of the book, the atmosphere of the writing, and
Yeah.
where we are.
And can I thank you, Ian and Brant, as well? That's awesome, Brant. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Everyone's so positive. Thank you, everybody. Chris, I don't know whether you remember, but it was actually doing one of these Zoom interviews with you for one of your books that I read you the front of this. Because I just written it, and you're like, "Ooh, that's good." And
Yeah.
your encouragement, man. I was like, "Okay, maybe I've got something here." I was really so really. I should have put you more in the acknowledgement section. Clearly, so I'll read from the.
I can ask you about acknowledgements later if you like.
Sure, sure.
Go.
So I'll read from the start. This is the very opener of the book. In the end, he was alone. It was musty and dark in the earth, the taste of iron, dirt in the mouth. A struggle to breathe, his bad leg groaning like he was decades younger, and the injury was fresh again. His chest throbbing gunshot blood, the backs of his legs leaking. He had always known it would be this way. Deep in the bloodied ground he'd made his name on, The boy he'd murdered, reborn. He knew that now, mongrel little shit. Conspiring with the spirits, all of them bent against him. The boy manifest in every circumstance, all people. His rotten luck, not born of chance, but born of the decision he'd made all those years ago. He did not regret he had killed the boy. He regretted only he had not killed him so hard he had stayed proper dead.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And that's, as we find out, it's because he's not named, but it seems pretty obvious to me that this is John Lacey and that's his death. So,
yeah.
so there's a mystery of how he gets to that point.
Yeah.
But is he, so in the book there's two lots of brothers. There's John Lacey and his brother Gray. There's
Yeah.
a couple of other brothers, Ernst and Joe.
Yeah.
And there's another character, Gilbert Delaney, who's also very important. Was John Lacey the character you began with when you started writing this book?
Yeah, he was the very first thing. And I'd always wanted to write a real villain, you know. I think that a lot of my favorite books and favorite so I always go to Judge Holden from Blood Meridian. I always think of him as this transcendental force of nature, this interesting, huge, bold man with really weird philosophy. And and I think of Daniel Plainview from There Will Be Blood, but these people who, even someone like Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now, you know, like it's these villains that aren't just mustache twirly and antagonists and don't have a lot going on. These villains are ones that make you think about your own humanity, and they're strangely captivating in this way, but they're strangely horrible as well. And it was really thinking about those characters. I thought I really want to create someone like that in my own work. And John Lacey, I actually don't know where the name came from. I don't know how he got his name, but he was just always John Lacey. And it was always an exercise in never regretting anything. He is always 100%. He doesn't think about things like in right and wrong. Like I was just going to say, he's 100% right in everything he does. He doesn't have that barometer. It's like he's absent morality. And he just looks at the world. How can I navigate my way through this world to get the most power over the most number of people that I possibly can? And so when I wrote that opener, I was a little shocked, you know, because when you're dying, you think that perhaps you would go over maybe the circumstance about how you came to be dying. Maybe you'd regret some certain things, especially when it sounds like it's, you know, gunshot blood and all that sort of stuff, like thinking about the course of action that took you there. But he doubles down. Like he's no regret. He's like, I wish I'd done more murder to children. Like he's so, and I was shocked when I read that. I was like, wow. And it sounds like, I often think with my writing, like I try to improvise. So I actually think of it like acting a little bit, and I'm trying to improvise all the different roles all at the same time. And I try to write so quickly that I'm just keeping up with my own improvisation. It's a strange state of mind, but when I say that I was shocked at the opening, is because I was pretending like if I were this sort of person, how would I think about this situation? But I found him troublingly captivating. Like he's so horrible to people, yet he's kind of fun to read. I don't know if anyone else.
He's very compelling. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he is. And you almost don't. It's almost like
he's not bound by the normal constraints of
right.
polite society or personal morality.
Yeah, yeah, and it's. I think that because I actually started to think about it like a modern day parallel, but there's a number of politicians and leaders and people in positions of power and CEOs, and they're quite charismatic. And I think it almost sometimes them making decisions kind of excuses us from having to make difficult moral decisions ourselves. I'm just following this person. I just do what this person says. It like absolves us of a responsibility. But I don't know. Like they're just. It's yeah. It's like we want to. It's like we want to be absent of conscience ourselves deep down. Like
Yeah,
wouldn't life be easier, Chris, if we didn't care?
true. Now, tell me, you say you wrote that scene and it kind of
Mm,
shocked you the way
yeah.
he reacted and the way he doubled down, and was so utterly beyond redemption, if you like. Is that how you began the book? Did you write that scene first, or was that something you came back to?
That was first. That was the very first thing I wrote.
So
Um,
that, yeah, go on.
I did go back to it. I did. There were some. There were some little. I mean, we can talk about it, but like the back of his legs leaking gunshot, leaking blood or something like that. I had to put that in so it was consistent with how the ending ended up
Yeah,
playing out. There were a few little plot things like that, but the tone of the front, the tone of that opening was there from the get go. And I hadn't always placed it right at the front of the book. It was a long time writing this book where I had this big mess and I
yeah.
had no idea how it was actually going to be to go into a book. But when I landed on that idea of starting with that, yeah, it never wavered.
So you've got this character. You start the book. You've got this character, John Lacey, and he's totally sort of immoral or amoral, or however you want to put it. Is that how the other characters came into being? That they were kind of a reaction against him. That they were more moral people,
Mm.
to a greater or lesser extent, and how they dealt with the circumstances, with how they dealt with the cards they were dealt,
Hmm.
and how they dealt with John Lacey, this total kind of monster of a bloke. Is that really how they came into being? To sort of, if you like, reflect on him?
I don't think so. I mean, I think they play that role, and in reading it now, they're certainly playing that role, and they are a counterpoint, and they are, I think Ernst has a kind of almost a purity to his love because he's almost not very thoughtful about it. He's not philosophical. It's almost like it's just a pure love that he has for his brother. And it comes out very messy because again he doesn't think about himself that way. But and then Gilbert's love is more philosophical and more maybe more thoughtful, maybe more theological. So both of them are interesting counterpoints. But I'll be real, the way the book structured itself was I had this villain, and then there's a scene. Have you ever seen the TV show Deadwood?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
great.
I know what you're talking about though.
Yeah, it's actually mentioned on the cover.
Yeah.
From Paul Daly mentioned it was
Oh
very
yeah, he was
significant.
always a huge fan of Deadwood when it
Yeah.
first came out. I remember that because he was living in Canberra.
Yeah, and so Robin saying it on the chat too. Yeah, well, probably one of my favorite TV shows in history. I love that show. But if you remember the pilot started with the character sheriff of Seth Bullock, and he has this guy in his prison, and the guy in the prison he's done something to the cattle or something of this farmer's
Yeah,
property, and this farmer comes along to the jail saying to Seth Bullock, the sheriff, bring him out. We're going to string him up. He's going to come with us. We're going to kill him. We've got 10, he's got like a posse of 10 guys. They're all drunk.
yeah,
They've got weapons. And Seth Bullock comes out and he doesn't waver and he stands in between this mob and this farmer or this I guess he's a thief. And he ends up hanging the guy under the color of law, is what he puts it. And I was like, I love that scene so much. But I thought, I've got John Lacey, this villain, this powerful and ruthless person. Like when you read him, you know he's capable of anything at all. He has no moral feeling. And I thought, what an interesting thing to have him here and then have a person who's very weak over here, weakened,
mm,
and then a person standing in between saying, you can't have him. What sort of a person would this person be? What sort of a person would this person be? And that's where Ernst and Gilbert really came out of that function. And I thought, because I had Ernst in the chapter where he was on the run, and he just went into Ballarat with his brother Joe. I had that first, and I was like, why don't I go back further and actually look at how they became brothers? And it was all sort of just spiraling out from that original conception, so I could land at that ending.
Ah, okay, I'm with that. That makes sense. By the way, did you ever see that TV show I recommended to you, The English?
No, no, I forgot you recommended it. To be
You,
fair, I was after an 8 hour drive, but
you will
yeah,
love
no,
it. It's a western um, with Emily Blunt in it.
I've heard of
It's
it.
on a
Yeah,
streaming service, so it's that's the trouble. You get recommended something, and if you don't have a subscription, it's hard to find. But
I
I
just
think
wrote it
you would,
down now.
I
Oh,
think
Rafe Spall.
I think you would really love that. Yeah. So the book starts with that scene, 1870, John Lacey dying, and then chapter two starts, and it's 1847.
Hmm.
So what's that? 23 years earlier with Ernst and Joe Montague. So what? I mean, eventually, sometime in the future, they'll encounter Lacey, but that for not for quite a long time.
Yeah.
What was about their story? How did that come to you, and what attracted you to their story? Because, um, oh well, I'll let you answer. Yeah,
No, you're right. Um, yeah, well, they came riding in, and Joe had they were brothers, but Joe had an Aboriginal, a Wadawurrung mother, and so that was always a part of his character. But it was in the research that it really came out. The way that white settlers would often insert themselves into um, Aboriginal First Nation families. They would often have children with them, and I think in my novel, it's a lot nicer tone. Honestly, it's still terrible because he's taking things that don't belong to him, but um, it was worse in real life a lot of the times. Um, but I just thought having Ernst and Joe have this relationship and built out in this fraught sort of situation, um, and love each other, but also at the same time, like Joe is a little bit unknowable to Ernst in a way. And so I don't know. I just thought that was a really interesting dynamic between the brothers, and that opener um, was really born out of that. It was born out of I started with Ernst. Can I say too? We'll spoil this first section. If you remember at the end of that first section, Isabel actually, sort of in her fit of rage, sets her own home on fire and
no,
herself.
Isabella's Ernst and Joe's mother. I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
Ernst's mum.
Ernst's mother.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah. So she does that in sort of a fit of rage, and you could almost read it as accidental, but um, that was actually born out of a real life story where a woman found out that her husband had fathered children with a First Nations person, and she actually purposefully lit herself on fire in an act of protest. Yeah. So, because I've read a couple of times, like there's been a few people review the book and say, like, oh, it's a little bit, these things seem a bit full on. But I think I mean, it sounds terrible. I think I almost made it more palatable, the book.
I think
Real
so. The
life.
relationship between the father and the the Aboriginal woman with whom he has the baby. Like I think on the frontier, a lot of those kids just came out of you
Yeah.
know just brutal rape rather than any kind of relationship like that.
Yeah.
Um, Isabel's really the only. Am I right in thinking it's been a while since I read it now? It's the only really notable female character in the book.
She plays a big role in that opener, yeah. And then
Yeah.
I would also say that Gilbert's wife also,
Yes.
Sarah, I think her name is. She plays a big role in his life as well, and
It's
often
certainly
sees him right.
she and the kid certainly weigh on his mind.
Yeah,
Okay, so you've got these two brothers, Ernst and Joe, and Ernst they're kind of criminals. They're rough. Ernst's great redeeming feature, though, is his love for Joe.
Mm.
He's his half brother, right?
Hmm.
What's
Yeah.
what? So what are you trying to get at there?
I think sometimes that I would say, Gilbert's love and Gilbert's sympathy and Gilbert's integrity is framed through philosophically sorting through the right course of action and filtering it through his own lens, I would say. Um, and I think that there's a great deal of compassion there. And I love Gilbert's probably the closest character I've ever written to myself. I really love Gilbert. But I think that the way he sort of arrives at the end of the novel, that maybe he just needs to let people decide their own fate for themselves a little bit more rather than trying to control them. His love's quite controlling. And I think throughout the novel, I think most of the characters control other characters in one capacity or another, locking them up without them wanting to. Edwin inserting himself into the Waddarung family. I would say the only person who, I mean, he does sort of try, but I don't know. I feel like Ernst doesn't want to control Joe. I feel like his love is almost purer because he's not thinking it through. He's just doing the thing that he knows he needs to do. He just, you know what I mean?
Mm.
And I don't know whether I'm saying that intelligence increases our risk for, I don't know. I feel like sometimes we get trapped in debate and overthinking things. And sometimes we just need to be there for other people rather than, rather than always sum up what the right thing to do is. Sometimes we just need to listen, I think. And I think Ernst is, especially towards the end of the book, he's doing that a lot better. Um, can I just answer something, Chris? I'm just seeing in the chat. Susan said aspects of this story was gory and somewhat uncomfortable. Yeah. Yep. Um, yeah, the violence in the book is, I think, quite uncomfortable. Um, and I just, it's always been an effort of mine to make violence ugly. I don't think it's, can I say I love John Wick as much as any other person? I love reading a crime thriller where the violence is necessary for the plot, and it's. But I really wanted to make the violence ugly, and I think it's quite difficult to do that. Um, but yeah, and I'm glad people feel uncomfortable. I actually remember there's a movie I watched. It was a long time ago. I think it's called Fool's Gold, and it had Kate Hudson and it had Matthew McConaughey, and it was like a romance thing. But I remember a guy was shot in that film as a punchline to a joke, and I remember thinking like we've lost something a little bit. Violence to me should be painted in a terrible way.
So now that various people have read the book, what are some of the reactions you've had to it, and have any of them kind of surprised you or kind of enlightened you in some ways? That because readers can take very different
Mm,
takes on a book, and this book is one of those ones that isn't spelling out to the reader what they should think. I mean, you
yeah.
can take all sorts of things out of this book, I imagine.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. I think there's probably two things that have surprised me the most. One, which is the less surprising, was that a few people have written that they would have preferred to have read more about how John Lacey came to power. So not just the section where he finds the gold, but then how does he use that gold to build up this town? And they really, I think, wanted to read more about his rise. But to me, not to answer that sort of, I guess, maybe a criticism of the book, but to me, he's on his way. Like where I leave him, it's already done and dusted. He's got his power. He's fought through this thing. He's determined. Like to me, it's almost like that stuff. I feel like if I were to paint that too much, I would. If that was on TV, I would be fast forwarding those bits and be like, oh, "Come on, like get to the next thing where something dramatic is happening," which is where he runs into Gilbert. Um, So that would be the one thing. The other thing that surprised me probably more than any other thing was the number of people who have not appreciated my lack of dialogue marks in the book. Um, because can I say to you, Chris, like it never occurred to me that that was something that people wouldn't like. Um, because I've read most of my favorite authors, a lot of my favorite authors write with that. So Tim Winton and Richard Flanagan and Cormac McCarthy and even Sally Hepworth, it's a thing that's a lot of authors have been using for decades. And so whenever I read a book like that, I just sort of go along with it. Rowan Wilson's another one. Um, but a lot of people have been very animatedly almost angry about that. And um, that shocks me. It just never struck me. When I read a book, I always just try to read the book the way the author wants people to read it. I try to be on their side. And it almost feels like if I come to a book and have a thing like I want it to look like this and be this way, I don't know. It's just not how I read. That was shocking to me, Chris. It was almost the very first review of it.
No, I can understand that. You put so much effort and passion.
4 years, yeah.
Yeah,
I,
yeah, blood, sweat, and tears in the book, and someone picture over on the type, essentially
yeah,
the
yeah,
typesetting
and
or the
the book is so much more complex than that as well,
yeah,
and has other things that I think people could actually be, confronted by, but to be confronted by that. But the way I think about it too, there's so many different things that I think it does for the book with the tone, and I think it strips it back, and I think these people didn't have luxurious lives, so maybe they couldn't afford quotation marks. Like I have a lot of things about it.
mm,
Um, but to me, the restriction of it, I think, makes my writing better. I
yeah,
think that when I was in the band, I used to play a 5-string bass. So when we hit that low, heavy section for the really heavy riffs, I would just hit that low B string. Um, but it was my guitarist who said, "Why don't you use that 4-string bass? Because I've got this Fender Jazz. It was this beautiful bass." And I said, "Oh, but I can't do the heavy bits. I have to use the 5-string." And he's like, "No, you can. You just have to be more creative with less." It's like, oh. And so then with having less strings, I lost that crutch to rely on. I then was forced to be more creative. And so I think having restriction kind of makes you more creative with what you have. Imagine trying to build a whole table with, 3 planks of wood and a saw. Like you're forced to do things differently. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
yeah. And see, Robin saying here, this book is very well suited to the style of writing, and that's something you really want to try as an author, that to match the tone and the style of writing to make
Mm.
it suit the story. I mean, you wouldn't have such a pared back, kind of lean sort of style if you're writing I guess, a comic novel or something like that, right?
Yeah, or like a lyrical sort of, I mean,
Yeah,
like a historical novel, I think they can be very florid and very proper and very in that way. But I was trying to write lean, I didn't want to
yeah,
have all that sort of stuff. There's a
yeah.
few
How many
people,
words has it been?
I think it was like 78. It's
Okay, so
pretty lean.
that's um, so many good books are that length, which is on the shorter side for novels. I think
Yeah.
the typical length is more like 90, maybe at a guess. I don't know. Mine are
Yeah.
always completely overblown and over 100, but that's just me. Can't shut up.
Can I say just really quickly, there's a couple of comments, very interesting comments about the audiobook. That's really interesting. I'm actually curious about that.
Yeah, I'm seeing that
People
too.
saying,
So some people saying they enjoyed the audio, some people they didn't. And
yeah, it's
was
interesting.
it? Is it? I don't know whether it was the dialogue was difficult to follow in the audio book.
Was it the narrator or something? Yeah, because I imagine the dialogue if you didn't know that there were no quotation marks, the audiobook would just read like they were there. So it must be something else. And yeah,
Yeah,
so Robin's saying it's a choice of narrator.
it does. I think the
Oh, I won't tell him that. Sorry, Stephen's my guy. I love Stephen Hunter's narration. Yeah, I won't pass on your feedback, but I have heard you.
Someone's saying narrator was brilliant.
No, it's
Another one
okay.
saying narrator was fine.
Yeah,
Some
yeah.
saying Ben, you should have
No,
narrated it.
I can't. I can't act. Stephen can act.
I,
He was in
I,
The
te-
Hobbit.
I tell you, these audio narrators, it sounds simple, right? So if I try to read one of my books, despite my croaky voice and that, the descriptive passages, okay, maybe I'd have a halfway decent shot at it. But when it comes to the dialogue, it's typically just one narrator, right?
Yeah,
They
yeah.
bounce between like male, female, kids, Indigenous people,
Very difficult. Yeah.
Scottish women, whatever. I mean, it's kind of magic what they do. I can't
Amazing. Yeah.
really get my mind around it. So,
And yeah, everyone in the chat too. Like, it's okay if you didn't like it. That's okay. It's
yeah,
totally fine. We're all different and we have different tastes. It's actually interesting when they did the audiobook. They send you actors and they send you auditions. And I landed on Stephen because he was a good mix. He had a bit of Australianism to him, but at the same time, he wasn't so. To me, he wasn't as wooden. And then I read one that was very ochre, and it was a bit too much. And then I read one that was very almost British, and that was a bit too far in the other direction. So yeah, it's an interesting process, though. You should, if you guys are writing at all, like having someone read your work back to you is disconcerting. And you've never read your own work as closely. When you hear someone speak your words aloud, it's you certainly find where you're like, oh, I should have edited that a little bit closer.
do you ever do it yourself, Ben, when you've written something, kind of read it out loud just to get the kind of flow of it?
Yeah, I do. Do you? I do every book, every sentence I read aloud. I do like an out loud pass, and I do it twice. I do it once before I send it to Gabby, and then I do it once before I lock the final thing. I do one last pass where I read it aloud to check that it's all sounding good.
Yeah, it's a very. I used to be in a previous life a television reporter. And
Hmm.
I write my script, and I think it was just spot on, as good as I could get it. Then I go into the voice booth to record my voice, and sure enough, reading it out loud, I go, oh no, that's not quite right. I need to change that. So I think ultimately language is spoken first. That's how our minds have evolved. And writing is a reasonably recent invention, and
Mm.
it really is just the sort of a encoding of the spoken language. You do get books that are just visual, but
Yeah.
I think for most of us, and this is a story, you're saying, listen, I'm going to tell you a story, come with me,
Mm.
let's go back in time, and we're with this bloke dying. That's
Yeah.
essentially the deal, isn't it? That's the
Yes.
invitation to the
Yeah.
reader.
Yeah.
It's almost like sit by the campfire. I want to tell you this story.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that idea. I like that. It's so simple in its way. It's I'm constantly amazed at the magic of writing. There's 26 different letters in different orders, and we have so many books with so many different ways to read them. And when I was talking earlier about the dialogue marks, I actually don't mind too if that's how it's read. It was just shocking to me, but I think one of the brilliant things about writing and reading, and then things like this book club, is that we're just all different people, and it's so magic. It's like this, right? Like, imagine me in 30 years and then having like my great grandkids reading this or something like that. Maybe not in 30 years, that seems too fast. But my point is, it's like I'm time traveling. This has been 2023, and it's like I can time travel and whisper into a person's ear, right? And create this thing with them. I feel like books are this joint thing where I'm doing, this is almost like a layout, like a blueprint, but when you're reading it, you're creating it. And it's magic, and I love it. And I'm very happy. Anyone who's read any of my books, but anyone who reads in general.
So you were saying you were really happy and satisfied with the way that this book turned out. said something like, if you died now, you'd be happy because you've got this book over you.
No, I said if I
But
stopped
you're not.
writing, not if I died, Chris. Come on.
Yeah, you're not stopping now, though, are you? You are gonna. Do not disappoint us. You are going to write
No,
more. Right? Are you writing more now?
I am. I
Tell
am. And
us.
if we had more time, because I actually think we're out of time. If I had more time, I could go on my pitch. Um, I'm actually working on two different things, and I'm actually toying with the idea, Chris. Let me see if you think this is interesting. I've got this book idea, a different one to the one I talked about with you. I've got this other idea where I was going to write some screenplays and write it as screenplays first, and then sort of see what it's like. And even maybe think about pitching those screenplays. And, I don't know what I'm doing, so who knows what that'll happen. But I could go to a local theatre group and see if they could put up scenes and see what actors reading and acting out my scenes. Imagine that. Imagine what you could learn about your own characters with other people. I don't know. That's the idea anyway.
Well, actors, when you read a book, every reader's a bit like an actor because you in your mind you're bringing that dialogue to life, right? You're bringing
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that's why readers have such vastly different takes
Mhm.
on the same text. Yeah, and that's the great skill of an actor, of course, to take
Yeah.
a line and infuse it with their own kind of interpretation. That's a good idea. I know Nigel Featherstone, who lives in Goulburn, does
I'll have to
does
talk
work
to him
with,
about
with,
it.
with theatre people.
I'll have to talk to him.
Although I don't think that's as a process in the book writing. I think that's a
Yeah,
standalone thing he
Robin's
does.
saying down here, what did Robin? No, screenplays lack the depth of text. Actually, strong disagree. I actually think films are equally as deep, although not as long. And well, maybe you're right. But I wouldn't. I'd still be writing a novel. The screenplays would sort of just be an effort in figuring out what the novel is in a really, really deep way, if that makes sense. Just another way of thinking. But no, it would be a novel at the end of it. Chris, I think we're out of time, man. Do you mind if I go through a couple of these questions?
Yeah, please do. I missed the chat function. I didn't have it
You're all
operating
right. That's
before.
okay. Can we
That's
all
easier.
give a clap to Chris for being wonderful, please? Thank you, Chris, so much. You are amazing. And I'll pay you in more interviews with you later on. So Judy asked, how can I find details of the book club? Really good question. If you go onto Facebook and you type in Ben's Book Club, you should find our Facebook group, and I post details about all the upcoming events. Next month, we're interviewing Joanna Jenkins about her new book, How to Kill a Client. And she's an actual lawyer, and she wrote a book about someone trying to kill a client legal or not legally, but anyway, very exciting to talk to her, but that'll be next month. Mandy asked, did you read any of your book to your students? I do sometimes. I actually use the way I think about writing, and especially refinement and making things better. I certainly do show them my rough to start and then how it improves. I sort of show them how the sausage gets made. 3 plays by Tim Winton. Okay, I'll have to look at that. Everyone's just saying thank you now. Oh, clap, clap, clap. This is all for you, Chris. Robin said, not a Facebook follow. If you type in Ben's Book Club into Google or anywhere, you will get the Eventbrite. Eventbrite's really the place to go. And there's a new event every month, but local libraries as well will be able to sort of help you check in and figure out what the next one is if you want to go and talk to a staff member. Awesome. Yeah, Ian, thank you, man. Ian's from over the pond. Ian, you love Chris too. I know you do. Yeah, and thank you to Libby and everyone for this. I mean, and thank you guys. Like, it's been almost a year and a half we've been doing this book club now, and it's just so awesome to see this little community and spend time with you guys every month. And I don't know whether you are all aware of this, but because of Ben's Book Club, each month and each featured author, they actually become the highest loaned ebook in Australia for the month that we feature them. So you guys are doing a great job, and this club is really helping promote really awesome Australian talent. So yeah, it's been awesome, and I'm really looking forward to doing this every month for the foreseeable future. It's something I look forward to. Cool. So Chris, man, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to reading your new one. I'd love to have you on this club if you're willing. When
Oh
it's is
yeah, of course. Yeah.
it still aiming for roughly October, like normal with you?
That's what I just submitted it last week. Our mutual publisher, Jane, she's in the middle of editing a Christoph Zolkos book, so I guess he takes
Oh,
I guess he takes precedent.
he
But yeah,
does.
yeah, I think October, fingers crossed.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, cool. Well, I'll talk with Mel, but I'd love to have you.
yeah, pencil me in.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
And so, name Smithy Zoom. That's awesome. Glad you enjoyed it. Thank you for participating in the chat as well. But other than that, we'll see you all next month for Joanna Jenkins and How to Kill a Client. Keep an ear out at libraries and things. But Chris, thank you again, and thank
Thank
you
you.
everyone for reading my book.
Okay.
See you guys.
Bye
Bye.
now.